Norway. Throughout the 21st century, we know it as the most prosperous democracy in the world. With the help of its natural resources, this Scandinavian country, with its fascinating beauty, has turned itself into a paradise. But decades ago, the situation was different. On April 9, 1940, Nazi Germany declared war on Denmark and Norway. Denmark surrendered in less than a day, and Norway was left alone at the front. The Norwegians fought bravely, but they had no chance against the Nazi occupier. Nazi rule remained in Norway until the end of the war in Europe. But why did the Nazis invade Norway, and how is the treatment they gave to the Norwegian people related to strange beliefs in racial purity? In this video, we will reveal what this beautiful country saw in the 1940s. The story of modern Norway begins in 1905, 35 years before the Nazi invasion. Norway was part of a united country with Sweden. But that united country, which reminds in its style of the Union of Czechoslovakia, was not very successful. The Norwegians felt disadvantaged, because the Swedes were a relative majority that took over most of the positions of power. In 1905, by mutual consent, the Union dissolved and Norway began its existence as an independent country. Norway maintained close ties to Sweden, and they were coordinated on many issues. One of them was the position of neutrality during the First World War. Just like Sweden, the Norwegians tried to stay away from military conflicts. They managed to maintain this position until the Nazi invasion, which left them no choice but to violate neutrality in favor of homeland defense. As we know, compared to Norway, Sweden managed to remain neutral. The Nazis chose not to invade it. But why was it like that? On April 9, 1940, during World War II, Nazi Germany launched an invasion against Denmark and Norway. This surprise attack was part of Germany's strategic plan to secure key resources and positions. One of the main reasons for the invasion was to control the shipping lanes of the North Sea, which were essential for maritime activity and trade. Both Denmark's and Norway's coastlines bordered these vital waters, making them major points of interest for the Germans. This is exactly where Sweden's neutrality comes into play. Sweden used to supply ore and iron to Germany, but also to the United Kingdom. Shipments to Churchill's country were made via the North Sea, which borders Denmark and Norway, but not Sweden. When the Nazis conquer Denmark and Norway, they will be able to secure the North Sea borders and prevent Sweden's resource shipments from making their way to His Majesty's army. Another significant factor was Germany's need for iron ore, a critical resource for the production of weapons and machinery. While Sweden was a neutral country, it was also a major supplier of iron ore to Germany. By controlling Norway, the Nazis ensured an uninterrupted supply route for this vital resource. While Sweden was indeed critical for Germany, the Nazis preferred to maintain its neutrality. An invasion of Sweden could have disrupted the steady flow of iron ore, and it could also have brought Sweden to war against Germany. Instead, the Germans relied on diplomacy and economic incentives to secure Sweden's cooperation and continue iron ore shipments. Germany invaded Norway in April 1940 to get ice-free harbors for its navy so it could control the North Atlantic, to get iron ore from mines in Sweden, and to spread the idea of a Germanic empire. But Norway wasn't really ready for the German military invasion. This led to a big storm on April 7th, which made it hard for the British Navy to get in touch with the German invasion fleet. Operation Weserübung was a German attack on Norway from the sea and the air. The first wave of German attackers only had about 10,000 men. The Germans took over most of the major Norwegian ports from Oslo to Narvik. They did this by sending German troops ahead on destroyers. One battalion of parachutists took over the airfields in Oslo and Stavanger, and 800 operational planes pounded the Norwegian population. Narvik, Trondheim, Bergen, Stavanger, and Kristiansand didn't put up much of a fight. After getting a foothold in Oslo and Trondheim, the Germans launched an attack on the ground against the scattered Norwegian forces that were still fighting. The Allies tried to fight back several times, but each time they failed. Even though Norway's resistance wasn't very successful on the battlefield, it had a big impact on politics and helped the government and royal family escape. Many of Norway's best weapons were taken by the Germans, which made it harder for the country to get ready for war. The government's vague order to get ready also made things harder, as did the general confusion caused by the psychological shock of the German surprise attack. After the initial chaos, the Norwegian army got back on its feet and fought back several times, slowing the German advance. But the Germans, who were quickly helped by panzer and motorized machine gun battalions, were unable to be stopped because they had more people, were better trained, and had better equipment. By April 23rd, the idea of evacuating Allied troops was out in the open, and on April 24th, Norwegian troops, with the help of French soldiers, failed to stop a panzer advance. The British decided to leave Norway on April 26th. By May 2nd, both Namsos and Dalst had been left. At Vingisvingen and Hidra Fortress on May 5th, the last pockets of resistance in south and central Norway were put down. In the north, at the Battle of Narvik, German troops held out against 5 times as many British and French troops. It was a tough fight. As the Germans moved east, they were surprised when the British started to leave Narvik on June 3rd. The German offensive in France had gotten so far that the British could no longer afford to keep troops in Norway. The British Army left Norway, along with Norway's exile government that found a home in the United Kingdom. Even though the Germans had strong forces, the Norwegians did not give up easily. They resisted and tried to fight back against the invaders. Norway's King Haakon VII and his government escaped to Britain, from where they kept supporting the Norwegian resistance. The Norwegians fought hard in several areas, but because the Germans had more soldiers and better weapons, it was tough for Norway to win. By early June 1940, after nearly 2 months of fighting, Norway was fully occupied by Nazi Germany. The Nazis then controlled Norway until 1945. During this time, many Norwegians worked secretly against the Germans, helping in any way they could. When the war ended in 1945, the German soldiers left, and Norway was free again. But during those 5 years, weird things happened in Norway. During the German occupation of Norway from 1940 to 1945, a huge building project was done to bring the North into line with Hitler's new order. In order to get Norwegians to agree with their view of the world, Nazi leaders wanted to turn Norway into a model Aryan society. Hitler didn't kill a lot of them or force them to work for him. Instead, he used propaganda and gifts to win them over. His large-scale building and infrastructure projects were meant to bring Norwegians closer to him and convince them to join his greater German Reich. Months before the invasion in April 1940, the Nazis had already begun to make big plans for changing Norway's towns and landscapes. They thought that changing the environment was necessary for enslaving the Norwegian people and putting Germany in charge of the area to the north for a long time. Even though they told the Norwegians in public that they would only be there for a short time to protect them from British attacks, the Nazis had no plans to leave. The most ambitious project was New Trondheim, a brand new German city that Hitler hired Albert Speer to build on the Trondheim fjord. It was to be the site of a large new German naval base. Hitler wanted New Trondheim to be the center of German culture in the north, so it was kept a secret so as not to stir up the Norwegian resistance. Hitler and his architects cared a lot about town planning. They saw cities as places for the Volksgemeinschaft, or racial community, to perform. This is shown by the fact that they wanted to make ideal city environments in Norway while it was occupied. Even though the German occupiers believed in the idea of Nordic brotherhood, they kept themselves geographically and culturally separate as rulers. However, they did encourage another kind of getting to know each other. The SS leader Heinrich Himmler started the Lebensborn program in Germany in 1935 to encourage the birth of Aryan children. The program found a home in Norway, which was occupied at the time. The Nazis built more birthing homes in Norway than in any other country, even Germany. Germans moved north and started building a superhighway that would have connected Berlin and Trondheim. The Greater German Reich had just grown, and Hitler thought that by driving through these new areas, the the German people would become more familiar with them and be more willing to fight to keep them in the future. I'm sure many of you are wondering what happened to the Jews in Norway. Like in the Netherlands, did the old democratic culture encourage the residents to hide their Jewish neighbors? There were about 2,100 Jews in Norway when the war started. This is a small number. At the same time, more than 250,000 Jews lived in France, and more than 300,000 Jews lived in the United Kingdom. Eastern Europe was the main place of residence for European Jews. More than 3 million Jews lived in Poland, and more than 5 million Jews in the Soviet Union. In 1942, the Nazis began to arrest and deport Norwegian Jews to concentration camps. Many were sent to Auschwitz, a notorious death camp. This led to the tragic loss of many lives within the Jewish community. The Norwegians resisted these actions, but the occupiers' control made it hard to protect the Jews effectively. While there were Norwegians who actively resisted and opposed the Nazi regime, there were also those who collaborated with the Nazis, including aiding in the persecution and deportation of Jews. The collaboration varied among Norwegians and was not uniform throughout the population. Some Norwegians were sympathetic to Nazi ideologies and willingly cooperated in identifying and reporting Jews to the occupying forces. This information was often used to arrest and deport Jews to concentration camps. The Norwegian police, under German control during the occupation, were involved in these actions. A small number of Jews managed to escape the Nazis by seeking refuge in neutral Sweden, the neighbor country. However, it's equally vital to highlight the efforts of many Norwegians who resisted the Nazi regime and worked to protect Jews. Some individuals and groups went to great lengths to hide and help Jewish individuals escape Nazi persecution. The actions of these brave individuals demonstrated the diversity of responses within Norwegian society during a challenging time. For 5 long years, the Norwegian people lived under the harsh rule of the Nazis. But as the war started turning against Germany, things began to change. In 1945, the Allied forces were gaining strength. By April 1945, the German soldiers in Norway were getting weaker and less supported. In May 1945, Germany surrendered to the Allies, marking the end of World War II in Europe. This surrender also meant that the Nazi regime's control over Norway was finally broken. The Norwegian people could celebrate their freedom once again. The end of the Nazi regime brought relief and a chance for Norway to rebuild and recover from the damage caused by the war years. Norway, as we all know, did it well.